I like to think of the cybersecurity framework as, a way to see yourself from a risk perspective and start having those conversations of what keeps me up at night. Is it ransomware? Is it DDoS? Is it some sort of other risk that is germane to your particular organization? And then we can start having a conversation about what would I do in order to mitigate those risks.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Wiz is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and security thought leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Matthew Smith, former NIST Cybersecurity Framework Contract Team Lead, and now founder CEO of Seamless Transition, LLC.
To be really honest, Todd, I kind of lucked into it. I was in between jobs after college and was kind of retooling my skill set. And I came across a jobs post that was written in ones and zeros. And I thought to myself, wow, somebody messed up. It's going to have a stern talking to. But then I thought about it a little harder and wrote a quick, binary to ASCII parser. And it said, we're looking for people that look beyond the ones and zeros. And then there was a phone number. And I called the phone number, and 2 weeks later, I had a job, at G2, premier cybersecurity company at the time, and I've been in it ever since.
Oh, that is way too funny. I don't think I've heard anybody say that they had to convert their, convert the job description.
Yeah, so I was a systems engineer by training, and really just lucked into this, to be honest, into a great field.
Well, it's great to have you here today because you worked on something that is very near and dear to a lot of CISOs' hearts today, and something that most CISOs use every day. You want to tell us what that thing is?
Sure. First, I want to say thanks for having me on, Todd. We've worked together for a few years now, and I think you are a luminary and a great convener in the CISO space. And thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Most folks have heard of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and it's been kind of the de facto standard since 2014 when it came out, and people really started to pick up in 2014 that streamlining some of these regulations and best practices and standards was a good idea. So I think the framework really encapsulates a tremendous amount of latent energy that folks wanted to have in terms of a common language.
Mm-hmm. So you worked on the NIST cybersecurity framework in developing that.
Yeah, so I was the contracting lead for NIST at the time. And I guess I should state kind of first and foremost, I'm not representing NIST's views. I'm not representing NIST in any way. These are my own thoughts and considerations. So I was the contracting lead and worked embedded with NIST for a long, long time, 5 years, until I handed the program over to my successor. But we worked from the executive order in 2013 in February till February 2014 when we released it, kind of day in and day out, hand in hand with NIST and with everybody else who participated in the process. Which was a tremendous feat in and of itself to publish a framework in a year.
So what was the executive order requiring NIST to do?
So the executive order 13636 was primarily targeted at shoring up critical infrastructure cybersecurity. There were sections that related to DHS and OPM, and a bunch of other things. But specifically, NIST was tasked with convening critical infrastructure owners and operators in order to come up with a cybersecurity framework in order to harmonize that critical infrastructure on some sort of common language. And the idea was for the framework to be repeatable, flexible, risk-based. All of these words kind of appear in the executive orders, and we really use those as our kind of guiding light. And you'll hear Kevin Stein and Adam, if you go back, Adam Sedgwick from NIST, repeating a lot of those words because that's, what was used to build the framework.
So I remember at that time, I remember going to an early presentation about the work that was going to be happening with developing the framework. And there were a lot of CISOs that were saying, oh boy, why do we need another framework? I mean, we have ISO, we have all these other things. We have NIST 853, which has some great detailed controls in it. So why did we need this other framework?
So I think the real driver is the common language. I think, as you just alluded to, there were tons of disparate frameworks already out there. ISO, CIS, 853, COBIT, and every one of them is great in its own way. Right? They all sit in a very specific space in a very specific context. However, if somebody is trying to get started or wants to use multiple frameworks in conjunction with one another, it's really hard, or was really hard, to put those together in some sort of composable way or make them work together without a tremendous amount of effort and resources by your personal company to personally tailor everything to you. So the framework really served this purpose of providing, I'm going to keep coming back to that common language, vocabulary, if you will, to help organizations translate between frameworks.
So I know when I was writing the CISO Compass book, navigating cybersecurity leadership challenges with insights from pioneers, which you contributed to. And I remember writing the chapter about control frameworks. And I think I got up to 13 control frameworks, and I actually just stopped writing. I mean, it's not that there were only 13 control frameworks. It's like, really, do I need to add any more in here? I mean, I think I've covered the main relevant ones. So I clearly can appreciate that. And so how does NIST then, how does this, having the cybersecurity control framework, how does that help us manage all these other controls?
So what I think is important, and something that we've, consistently tried to message, as folks that use the framework, is that the cybersecurity framework, and, colloquially the CSF, is that it's not a controls framework. It's really a set of objectives to help you think about your cybersecurity risk management. I like to think of the cybersecurity framework as, a way to see yourself from a risk perspective and start having those conversations of what keeps me up at night. Is it ransomware? Is it DDoS? Is it some sort of other risk that is germane to your particular organization? And then we can start having a conversation about what would I do in order to mitigate those risks? And that's really where the subcategories come in. Maybe I want to inventory my hardware, inventory my software. Maybe I want to, protect data at rest. And then once we've had those conversations at a risk level, then we can start to dive down into those informative references, like you were saying, those control frameworks, 853, CIS, COBIT, ISO, and really dig into the nitty gritty of how we're going to protect data at rest. Because I really think every organization has some little wrinkle that they need to take into account when it comes to controls. So one of the main challenges was finding that right level of abstraction, the right level of granularity that the framework could be usable, right, helpful, as well as general enough so that most organizations could see themselves in it.
I know there's a lot of familiarity with our listeners around the NIST Cybersecurity Control Framework, but for those people that may not be familiar with it, what are those top categories that breaks down those objectives?
Yeah, so the framework core, the cybersecurity framework core, is broken into 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And within those 5 functions are categories, and within those categories are subcategories. All told, version 1.1 of the framework has 108 subcategories. So still lighter than your 853s or your in your COBITs, but very comprehensive in the fact of, there's still content there.
Okay, and then those were all then mapped to the other
Yes.
the other main standards out there.
Yeah, the subcategories were then mapped, like you said, to the other control frameworks. And I think a lot of users found that that's where the value was. Great, come up with these high level abstractions, and show me how they connect to the nitty gritty of what we're going to do once we have all of the talks in the C-suite. We've got to give our implementers something.
And one thing I really liked is that it simplifies the language of security when we're talking to the board, that we can talk in those different areas as far as what we have risk. And then we can also be matching up different technologies that help us in each of the different areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The 5 functions really provide that common sense language. If I'm talking to a board and they want to have a quick view of cybersecurity, 5 words is about all they can handle in an hour meeting, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to convey risk in those types of terms is really helpful, while not abstracting too much away from cybersecurity, still maintaining the heart of what we're doing.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. So how do I track my maturity? Does the NIST model support that?
So that's one of the things that I think from the beginning was a sticky wicket. Is how do we measure things? How do we show progression? And I think one of the topics that is perennially discussed is the notion of maturity. And the cybersecurity framework has something called the framework tiers. And we've seen, spotty use of those over the last 8 years. I think the tiers served as a way to kind of broadly discuss the concept of maturity. And then when folks were looking for something a little bit more meaty to hang their hats on, they started turning to other maturity frameworks to really measure progress. So I think that remains something to be discussed, is how do you measure maturity? I know a lot of folks, and myself included, when we're doing assessments, across organizations, we'll look to a CMMI maturity level to kind of augment the cybersecurity framework in that way.
So how do you relate the CMMI to the NIST framework then?
So what has proven to be pretty successful, and is, again, when you're talking to a board, you can qualitatively talk about what you're doing. However, it generally comes down to a number. Is it above 2? Is it above 3? Is it less than 2? Is it less than 3? Give us some sort of ranking, some sort of number that we can attach to. So what has, kind of been used in the stead of a built-in maturity model is that a lot of organizations will go to the subcategory level and then rank each subcategory within their cybersecurity framework profile against a CMMI process level. Is it ad hoc, measured, optimized, those kinds of things? Okay,
so you relate it at the lowest level of the framework.
And once you've done it at the lowest level, right, you can then begin to roll up those scores, right? So there are 6 subcategories in the IDAM asset management category. So you can average across those 6 subcategories to get your AM score, and then average across the categories to get your identify score. So folks seem to really like that.
So with things like ISO 27000 series controls, or the NIST 853 controls, a lot of times you'll have the auditors come in and audit against those controls to see if you're implementing that, to make sure that you keep your ISO certifications and so forth. Is there an auditing process with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework?
So there are folks that will get an assessment done against the framework. As far as auditing is concerned, NIST really is a standard setter. They're not a standards, enforcer. So we made very clear that the framework should be used by those who want to use it. So if an auditor wants to use the framework, that's their prerogative. There's no mandate of the cybersecurity framework. There's no requirement for anybody to use it in any specific way until a regulator or a state legislature or your IA, your internal audit, says that you have to use it in a specific way. So,
are you seeing that? Are you seeing any regulatory bodies mandating that, or any audit firms that are auditing against the NIST cybersecurity framework?
So what I've seen is that regulators have been really lax to pick up the cybersecurity framework and give it any teeth, so to speak. What we have seen is some state legislatures and some regulators, not too many, have picked it up and said, you have to use the cybersecurity framework in some way, which, as your viewers may or may not know, that's a very broad term. The cybersecurity framework is meant to be used in any different number of ways. So how one organization uses it may differ from another organization's, yet they still share the same vocabulary, the common language of the cybersecurity framework.
So I know that the cybersecurity framework is used in a lot of different countries, and I think in part because wasn't it developed during the development? Other countries were participating in that development as well.
Absolutely. NIST took a very much all-comers approach, served as a convener of cybersecurity. So the first version was, targeted, version 1.0 was targeted at U.S. critical infrastructure. And we got a tremendous amount of participation from U.S. critical infrastructure, U.S. telecoms, U.S. banks, U.S. based energy distributors, that kind of stuff. We had a small smattering of international folks coming in. It wasn't until after version 1.0 that we got a really strong international push. From version 1.0 to 1.1 is when the international crowd really started to pick up and continues to be very active, and something that we might get into a little later. But there was no desire to make it international focused. The desire was to, focus on the EO, focus on U.S. national critical infrastructure, and make it this, like I said, again, common language, vocabulary for cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's being used in other countries. Or were there what countries were started getting really involved in the development?
So from the beginning, the Japanese telecom NTT was quite prominent. We had some folks from Italy. We had some folks from Australia get involved earlier on, and then once 1.1 was starting to germinate, the doors kind of opened up. And, we started to get folks from Sweden and Germany. Now we have folks from Israel, folks from where else? The Philippines.
Wasn't ANISA involved as well?
Mm-hmm. We had some comments from ANISA. They were not as, kind of committed to the process, yet they did provide some comments. Some folks would be at every workshop, every RFI, every RFC, they would be submitting comments. And NIST, I think, submitted comments once or twice.
Mm-hmm. Good. So where do you see the framework, being used in the future?
So, the current state of the use of the framework is all over the map. We see it internationally. We see it being used in financial institutions. We see it being used in water and water utility institutions as well. And from my personal experience of performing assessments, it's used in nearly every sector. Whether it's telecom or IT or fintech, any sort of organization is liable to be using the framework, and I expect that to continue into the future. I think at the end of the day, it really speaks to the usability of the framework, and how it cuts to the quick of risk management with those 5 functions: the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover.
Yeah, I think it's a great communication tool that can be used across the organization and then with your senior management as well. And I think that's the beauty of it is actually the simplicity of it, not the complexity of it.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So what final thoughts do you have to share for people that are using the cybersecurity framework or thinking about using the framework versus other frameworks?
So I think what the final thought I would give to the users is that, see yourself in the framework. There is no right way to use the framework. If the functions fit your organizational structure, use the functions. If the categories or subcategories fit, use those. If only a subset fit, use those. Don't feel the need to kind of take on more than you need to. I think one of the more recent pieces of cybersecurity policy that's come out is a executive fact sheet from the White House. And something that my company has done is provided a profile, a cybersecurity framework profile against that fact sheet. That was provided in March 22nd on how to defend, again, critical infrastructure or any US-based company against increasing state-sponsored attacks. So again, using that framework as the translation, almost as a decoder ring, if you will, for policy that's coming out the pipe. CISA is always issuing new alerts. So using the framework as a way to kind of get to a common language, I think, is really the best arrow in the quiver.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. This has been great, Matt, and thanks for your work on this. It's clearly used by, I would venture to say, almost every organization these days. So it's quite a success to see the adoption rate so high. So thanks for your involvement in that and your work on that and taking the time to talk to our listeners today.
Of course. It's a pleasure to be here. And Todd, thank you for having me, and looking forward to working with you and your listeners in the future.
Thank you very much. Wiz is on a mission to help every organization rapidly identify and remove critical risks in their cloud environments. Purpose-built for the cloud, Wiz delivers full-stack visibility, accurate risk prioritization, and enhanced business agility. Wiz connects in minutes using an agentless approach that scans both platform configurations and inside every workload. We perform a deep assessment that goes beyond what standalone CSPM and CWPP tools offer to find the toxic combination of flaws that represent real risk. To learn more about Wiz, please visit securityweekly.com/Wiz.